Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri, and I'll be your host today. With each of these 30-minute webinars, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, and communities. For today's webinar, Dr. Sarah Lowe will present the results of research about farmers marketing food directly to consumers online. Before I invite Dr. Lowe to begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First, we'll close the webinar today with a question and answer session. Those of you who have connected to today's webinar via your computer can submit your questions in the chat screen. So to open that chat screen, just click the chat button that you see at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you joined by phone today, then you can email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical difficulties, then you can please let me know by either submitting a comment in the chat screen, or you can also send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu. Fourth, we will make a recorded copy of the webinar available to you. You can look for an email from Zoom that shares more about where you can access that recorded copy in about a day from now. Also, you can find an archive of all of our previous Engaging for Missouri webinars on our division's YouTube page. So with that, we'll transition to the topic of today's webinar, which is titled Online Sales as a Direct Marketing Opportunity for Rural Farms, Research Results. Presenting on this topic is Dr. Sarah Lowe, who is an Associate Professor of Regional Economics at the University of Missouri, and she's also the Director of MU Extension's EXCEED, Regional Economic and Entrepreneurial Development Program. So thank you, Sarah, for presenting today. If you could please start your video and unmute your microphone, then we can begin today's presentation.
Great, thanks Alice, and thanks everyone who's tuning in today. I'm excited to share this research with you. Okay, well let me get started with a little bit of an overview about what I want to talk about in the next 15 minutes. This is a research project, and I'm going to talk about the research, and I'll end with some resources for farmers who are interested in using online marketplaces to sell food directly to consumers. So a little bit of a background. This research project began in 2018 when my collaborator and good friend Jeff O'Hara, who's a research economist with USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, approached me. And he had this idea to use a brand new survey that had never been used before, had some information about online marketing. And because I had been doing a lot of research on entrepreneurship, on broadband, and on local foods, he thought this would be a topic that was of interest to me. So what we found in this research, essentially in a nutshell, the findings suggest that online marketing is a good resource for rural beginning farms and ranches who are interested in selling directly to consumers. Online marketplaces can help farmers sell food directly to consumers by reducing transaction costs, by reducing transportation costs, and those costs are highest for farms in rural and remote rural areas. So that's why this online marketing is really of interest. Of course, in 2018, when we started this research, we had no idea we would be where we are today with the pandemic. So the online marketing has become even more important in today's environment. And I think a lot more farms are going to be setting up online marketplaces. In fact, I'm trying to collect some data from some of the different vendors who help farms set up online marketplaces. And some of them are reporting doubling, tripling, quadrupling of their business, trying to help farmers set up online marketplaces. So we'll end with a little bit of more discussion on that. But it's always fun as a researcher to have some research that's a hot topic. And as an applied researcher, I'm always trying to I'm always trying to think about what will be of interest in 2 or 3 years when this research gets done. And so I think my colleague Jeff and I hit the nail on the head with this one today. So I hope you enjoy some of the results. Let me start with a little bit about the data. As I mentioned, this is a brand new data set that had never been used before. This data set is called the Local Food Marketing Practice Survey. We used the confidential microdata for this particular analysis, but aggregate data are publicly available to you, so you can go to this data set on the NAS website. I have the URL right there. So a little bit of the history of this research. Traditionally, the Census of Agriculture collects information on local or regional foods or direct-to-consumer marketing of food on the Census of Ag every 5 years. And this Local Food Marketing Practice Survey was originally envisioned as what we call a follow-on to that Census of Agriculture. So the idea was anyone who responded to the 2012 Census of Agriculture saying they were participating in local foods, then NAS, National Agricultural Statistical Service, would send them this follow-on survey to learn more about what with local foods. So we could get deeper, more complex, more detailed information than what we can get from a Census of Agriculture, where only a small share of people are interested in local foods. So that's kind of the genesis of this data set. There will be another one, kind of a follow-on to the 2017 Census of Ag, and that survey will be going out in the field early next spring and will cover the 2020 agricultural marketing year. So it could be kind of an interesting year to be collecting data on local food sales. I want to start with a note of caution too. Because this survey was a follow-on, the survey is only looking at so-called local food farms. So unfortunately, I can't make any comparisons to similar farms not participating in local foods. So for example, it might be really interesting to compare a farm that sells tomatoes and has gross sales of $250,000 a year to a farm that directly markets tomatoes and has sales of $250,000 a year. But this particular survey is limited only to local food farms, as defined as farms making direct sales of food to consumers, but also retailers, food hubs, or other aggregators, institutions, basically anyone kind of marketing their food as locally or regionally branded products. So enough about the data. Let me move on. Jeff and I published this journal article in January. It came out, it's freely available online. Our study is limited only to direct-to-consumer sales of food for human consumption. So we're putting aside the farm-to-school sales, the farms-to-institution, the food hub sales. We're focusing on farms that are doing direct-to-consumer sales of food for human consumption. And a little bit about those direct-to-consumer sales. Direct-to-consumer sales, really tremendous growth. 2007 Census of Ag, huge growth between 2002 and 2007 Census of Ag. A little bit of a leveling off between the 2007 and 2012 Census of Ag. And I think part of that was due to the Great Recession, okay? So the Local Food Marketing Practice Survey estimated US direct-to-consumer sales of food at 3.1 billion in 2015. So that's the survey I'm using today. The 2017 Census of Ag estimated it to be a little bit lower. That could be a little bit of noise in the data too. Most of the growth right now in local foods is coming from the intermediated sales, the sales to aggregators or food hubs, the sales to restaurants, the farm to school. We may see a change with that because of what's happening this year in 2020 with a lot of restaurants closing, a lot of institutional sales closing. One point of caution, the phrase local in this survey is not necessarily geographically contained. So I'll give that as a little bit of warning. I'll discuss that a little bit more when we go on. Let me start with some stylized facts, okay? So 6% of farms in the US have direct-to-consumer sales. In Missouri, it's a little lower, 3.7%. We found from the survey that 60% of the direct-to-consumer farms were using the internet for their farm business, okay? 8% of all the farms in the survey had an online marketplace. So about 8% of farms that are selling food directly to consumers had an online marketplace in 2015. The average sales from those online marketplaces were $18,000 a year. Interestingly, 72% of those online sales were considered local. And in this definition of local, USDA defines that as either within the state or within a 400-mile drive. So what that 72% suggests is that 28% of online sales were to non-local markets, okay? So that's something kind of interesting to think about. 28% of those online marketing sales were to somewhere either out of state or more than 400 miles away. All right. What we also found is that the farms with online sales had a lot of sales from online sales, of course, but they were more dependent on on-farm sales than other farms. So this chart shows on the left the direct-to-consumer farms that did not have online marketplaces. Their sales are a lot lower than the bar on the right. Those are the farms with online marketplaces. And a lot of that is, just kind of cause and effect. You have to have a certain amount of sales each year to justify even doing online, right? So we would expect the farms that have higher sales to be more likely to have online marketplaces. But what's really interesting in this chart is the reliance on the on-farm sales, those farm stands or those on-premises sales. And that's the lightest color at the bottom of the bar. So those farms with the online marketplaces are disproportionately dependent on on-farm sales as opposed to farmers markets or CSA's kind of off-farm sales. So I thought that was really interesting, this dependence on face-to-face or on-farm sales. And I think it suggests that on-farm experience, maybe it's an agritourism experience, that experience is very important to building clientele for those online sales. So it's kind of the sort of thing, you get them on the farm, you get them hooked on the farm, you get them interested in what you're doing, and then you can maybe sell to people non-locally. You can be selling your goods outside of the state or outside of that 400-mile barrier. I'm actually doing with my team an Exceed, we're doing a project on the distillers, the craft distillers industry right now. And nationally, about 40% of sales from craft distillers are on premises. So we can kind of think about that in this on-farm food context too. If 40% of distillers are reliant on sales on premises, and in the context of COVID, all this premises is closed, people can't be coming on farm, they can't be coming to the distillery, that represents a big hit for some of these small businesses. And I think for these farms doing direct-to-consumer sales, there could be a hit too. And it also reflects what's going to happen with their future online marketing. If they're using getting people into the tasting room or getting people onto the farm as a function of building their clientele for online marketing, how can we build that clientele without that face-to-face interaction? So something kind of interesting to think about. There's also a lot of interesting work on value-added food. And for those of you who know my research agenda, I'm very interested in food processing, food manufacturing, and adding value to that food, okay? So value-added food, think about wine, cheese, processed meats, jellies, jams, salsas. Those are all value-added foods, right? So what we found in this study is that the in-person marketing and the online marketing is even more important for farms with value-added foods. So we just talked about how important face-to-face and online are for direct-to-consumer, but they're even more important for farms with value-added products. We also found that the value-added sales in metro-adjacent rural areas, so that's kind of non-metro areas, but fairly close to a metro, we're more likely to have an online marketplace than those in distant rural counties. And so that kind of goes back to this agritourism. If you have agritourism, if you can get people from the city to your farm, that opens up those online marketplaces. 78% of sales for these farms that had online marketplaces were due to value-added products, so 78%. That compares to 37% for the farms that were not doing online marketing. Okay, so the value added, the adding value to those goods is really important. And the online marketing, there's a strong nexus between value-added foods and online marketing. That maybe lends itself a little bit to the perishability of goods. If you're selling goods online and over a quarter of those sales are non-local, it's hard to ship perishable things. A lot of you maybe heard of Steve Hamra down in Sikeston, and he's a big fan of shipping lettuce with the roots on so it stays fresh, so it doesn't perish. But really what we see here in this chart is the farms with online marketplaces are much less likely to sell fresh vegetables and more likely to sell meat, in particular lamb. There was a big difference between lamb. And lamb is kind of something that's a little bit hard to find. It's a little bit of a specialty product. And so we see a higher share of folks doing that kind of work with the online marketplaces than without. So the products sold by these farms really do vary with the online sales participation. And I don't have the value-added products here, but those value-added or processed products make up a big part of that difference. Okay, so I just presented to you a whole bunch of stylized facts from our study. And the next set of results I'm going to share with you are results from our fancy statistical model. Okay, so essentially we're trying to hold other things constant and test ideas and test hypotheses. And one of our biggest tests that we were interested in doing with these really cool data were, what are the impacts, or how does online marketing affect new and beginning farmers, and how does online marketing affect opportunities for rural farms? Okay, so what we found is that essentially online markets are part of the business model for a lot of new farms, and particularly new farms in remote rural areas. So it seems that these farms realize that their distance to farmers markets, their distance to urban consumers is a barrier, and they're premising their business model around these online markets. So that's I think a really interesting result that we found there. Now, relative to established remote rural farms that are doing direct-to-consumer sales, so that's kind of our benchmark here, we found that the newer farms were 7% more likely to have an online marketplace. So, and in this study, we're defining new as less than 7 years in operation. So if you were in a remote rural area that is not in a metro area, not adjacent to a metro area, and you were new to direct-to-consumer sales, you were 7% more likely to have an online marketplace. So that's that building your business around the online marketplace. It's also quite likely that these new farms need that online marketplace to compete with established farms that already have strong relationships with consumers. We also found that the new farms in metro and metro adjacent counties were less likely to have online marketplaces. So this result kind of suggests that the distance to thick urban markets really does make a difference, and that this opportunity seems to be highest for the most rural or the remote rural farms in our sample. A lot of this is a little bit of repeat, but we did try to look at the kind of just wrapping up here, we did try to look at broadband access and the role that would play in online sales. It's very difficult to tease out online sales and access to broadband without some kind of experiment, but we do kind of find a positive correlation, of course, between having broadband access and having online sales. So I think the broadband is a big piece of this. I promised I would close with some resources for farms interested in pursuing online sales. On this slide, I just have a few of the many organizations that provide online platforms for farms. There's also a great webinar that Oregon Tilth did on online sales. I encourage folks to look into that. Also within MU Extension, our local foods team has put together a handout with lots of resources. I'm happy to connect people to that. And another resource I want to highlight is MU Extension's new Missouri Food Finder. So MissouriFoodFinder.org. For those of you with farms, you can actually upload your web page, your Facebook page, your contact information, and what you're selling, and that will show up on this interactive map. So I encourage you, whether you're a consumer or a producer, to check out MissouriFoodFinder.org, and that's brought to you by MU Extension. And I just want to close with some links to resources. As I said, the journal article that this research is based on is freely available at this link. There's also a 2-pager, kind of in a more lay language, fewer statistics, and that's available on the Exceed webpage also, that extension guide. For those of you who are producers interested in learning more about developing your own online marketplace, I encourage you to look at a guide that the Young Farmers Coalition put out a few weeks ago. It actually compares all the different software platforms, organizations, the fees. It's a really nice resource. And again, I have the link up there for the Missouri Food Finder. Lots of resources out there. Missouri is actually not a member of Market Maker, but in the Market Maker states, that's also a really good opportunity. So if you're joining us from outside Missouri, I encourage you to also look into Market Maker. If you're in Missouri, I encourage you to look at the Missouri Food Finder. And with that, I would love to take questions.
Excellent, Sarah, thank you. If you do have a question, please go ahead and submit that in the chat screen, or you can also send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu. We do have a question here, Sarah, about what are some options for farms to ship perishable products like beef, for instance, to ensure that the product quality is maintained?
I'm honestly not an expert in shipping and logistics, unfortunately. I do think that there are a lot of considerations to be made on that. And certainly shipping those sorts of things gets very expensive, right? Because you've got to have kind of a 2-day air. You've got to have dry ice, which is very expensive. So it's definitely a consideration to be made. And I would point out that with these online marketplaces, it's not that all of that food is being shipped, right? A lot of those online marketplaces were already doing what we're doing now with a curbside drop-off, or maybe a CSA-like kind of drop-off. So shipping isn't everything. And I do think that for the value-added products, particularly the non-perishable products, the shipping makes more sense.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for delivery routing software that different folks are using?
Yeah, if you look at the Young Farmers Coalition guide, some of the software platforms do actually have delivery routing logistics kind of built into those platforms. So I would encourage folks to look into those existing software platforms. You know, there are people that just have PhDs in transportation logistics, and I think they're trying to build some of those transportation logistics models into some of those platforms to help farmers decrease the food miles, essentially, of those drop-offs.
Great. There's a question here about Marshall Stewart has mentioned that the Food Finder was going national. Do you know what he's referring to when he says that by chance?
I had not heard that, but I'm not too surprised. I think it's a great resource, and I think there's no reason that the CARES team within MU Extension couldn't make the Missouri Food Finder, you know, make a Illinois Food Finder and a Arkansas Food Finder. I think it's a great concept. It's simple, it's easy to use, it's easy for consumers to use, it's easy for producers or farmers to use. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
I have a question about the profitability of different online sales channels and marketing. So you mentioned that the average direct-to-consumer farm made online sales that averaged about $18,000. So what's the cost structure like then for those farms?
Absolutely, great question. Unfortunately, in the data, we didn't have detailed financials enough to really look at the profitability, rather just the gross sales. But from my years at USDA working with confidential farm level financial data, I would say that the farms doing the direct face-to-face marketing, particularly at farmers markets, tend to have the lowest profitability of direct-to-consumer or local food farmers. And part of that is by the time you spend all day at the farm stall, you set up your stall, you tear down your stall, you pay to have the stall, it really eats into your profits. So I don't have any data on the profitability of online, but my hunch is that it's actually probably more profitable than a lot of the face-to-face alternatives that really take a lot of time, assuming you're paying yourself for your time, which I think you should.
Sure. So you mentioned some characteristics of farms that tend to be most likely to use online marketing. Is there any research that looks into the type of consumers that are most interested in buying online from farms and what they're looking for when they do go online to buy?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so we found, for example, female farmers are more likely to do this, beginning farmers are more likely to do this, urban farmers are more likely to have the online sales. There is a body of research out there that has looked at the consumer side, and it's relatively new research, but there is some articles that I've referenced. I'm happy to share those with folks that contact me. But yes, it's kind of what you would anticipate. The younger millennials, younger people are more likely to buy online. People in urban areas, people with higher income, people with higher education are more likely to buy online. And I think when we think about the nexus between online sales and the face-to-face, that agritourism piece makes sense, right? People with higher income, higher education may be more likely to seek out educational or agritourism experiences, and then they may be more likely to say, why, yes, I would like to have a case of wine delivered once a month to my home from your farm.
Sure. I do have a comment here. If you are looking for different options for Missouri products, Missouri Grown, and then also MissouriGrownUSA.com are two other websites to go and look for different Missouri raised products. And then also I have a comment here about shipping perishable gifts. There is an MU extension guide that talks about gift shipping, but that would also apply to shipping other products. So I'll include both of those URLs in the follow-up email that we send to all of our attendees and registrants today so they can access those resources too.
Great. Yeah, the gifts guide sounds awesome. And yeah, I would definitely like to give a plug to Missouri Grown. That's a great website, similar to the Missouri Food Finder. Producers can put what they're offering. Farmers markets can get listed on there. Lots of great resources listed on there. And particularly if you're looking for something specific, I was just searching on there for maple syrup recently. It's a really great tool, and hopefully we'll have a state fair this summer too, and folks can go check that out. I think that the Missouri Grown booth at the state fair is a great opportunity to have that, tangible face-to-face, and then maybe you can later go on to buy those products online.
Absolutely, yes. So according to your research, more than 3/4 of online sales from direct-to-consumer farms are sales of those value-added products. Are there particular value-added products that tend to be most popular when buying online?
Again, here we're limited a little bit by the data on the survey. So this survey didn't go into those value-added products particularly. But from what we could tell about the types of farms responding to the surveys, meat is huge. The specialty meats was a huge part of that value added. So jerkies and sausage and those sorts of things. So hopefully the next local food marketing practice survey will delve into that a little bit more, because I just find that value added to be a really interesting opportunity for Missouri farmers.
Absolutely. Although online sales give the opportunity for farms to reach a wider audience outside of their local areas, like some of your data suggest, it also expands the competitive set for farms because they compete with not just their neighbor down the street, but they're competing with farms all over the country. So what are some different options for equipping with those direct-to-consumer farms that have online marketplaces with what they need to compete with farms from all over the United States?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the market intelligence piece and the marketing piece, neither of which come really naturally to farmers, is part of that. From what I learned doing this studying, I really do think that face-to-face connection is driving a lot of those online sales. So if you have something very special, very niche, like you're looking for ostrich jerky, for example, maybe someone's just going to type into Google and try and find ostrich jerky anywhere in the country. There's probably a lot more specialized things, but that would be an example. But for people that have less specialized things, I do think that personal connection is really important. And I think that's why we see that on-farm sales and direct sales via online being tangential. So maybe part of the marketing is agritourism, or bringing people onto the farm for a day, getting, exposing people to your business, inviting people in. I think that when permitted by social distancing, I think that face-to-face interaction can then lend itself to a lot of future online marketing. And someone previously had asked a question about the consumer side of online marketing. One thing I will note from the literature on the consumer side is there certainly was a connection between having a relationship and then doing subsequent orders online. And so there was one study that said, once a consumer had purchased from a farmer, maybe they met them at the farmer's market, but they could talk to the farmer, touch the produce, smell the bread, whatever. Once that connection was made, then the trust level was elevated, and that enabled future sales to be online or direct, as opposed to at the farmer's market. So I think that face-to-face piece is an important part of the marketing.
Great. Well, it's time to conclude today's webinar. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing today's webinar presentation. And thank you to our audience too. When you exit Zoom, you'll see a post-webinar survey will load in your browser. If you could please consider responding, we'll use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future webinar topics. Again, you should receive a recorded copy of today's webinar via your email within about a day from now. So on Friday, we'll be back with another Engaging for Missouri webinar. Jalen Peckman, who is an agricultural communications instructor at MU, and Kate Preston, who is a graduate student of agricultural leadership, communication, and education, will present about communication during crisis. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.